So hello, everybody. I'm going to share a little bit with you about some concepts that we've been working on through Campus Compact, specifically around the work of equity. So one of them is what Andrew had mentioned earlier today, love, living out our value of equity. And so for me, this really came out, I was getting ready to do a keynote at the Mountain West Presidential Summit. And it came off of that week where there were a number of different hate crimes taking place. The two elder African Americans who were assassinated in a grocery store in Kentucky, and by the end of the week there was a mass shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And so thinking about the hate crimes that heavy week, and this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And so as we're working with the concept of equity, and then thinking about love as the antidote to hate, how do we live out our value of equity? How do we do that as Campus Compact internally? And how do we work with our member institutions to move that work forward within their institutions? So some of our Campus Compact in Minnesota worked with this group, Nexus Community Engagement Partners, or Community Partners. And they have this model of community engagement that really looks at equity being the work, right, of community engagement. And in their model, the outer circle is the tangible, visible goals of the work that community does together. And the inner circle are the community assets that are foundational to healthy communities. The wheel itself is dynamic, fluid, and interconnected. And their definition of equity, which I appreciate and want us to work from, is fair access to resources and opportunities, full participation in the life and well-being of the community, self-determination in meeting fundamental needs. And their work is also focused around this concept of healing. And the more that I'm going sort of across the country speaking to people, hearing stories from campuses, hearing the real trauma that individuals on campus experience who work there, right? Understanding the history of our higher ed institutions as not necessarily being places of access, but being places of exclusion, and the trauma that we continue to replicate through processes like tenure and promotion, divisions and siloing of departments, cutting into the liberal arts, cutting access to interdisciplinary work, ethnic studies, and other things, the more that I'm committed and understand that we need to do this work through a healing concept. So for them, healing through community engagement means centering self-care and personal healing, shifting organizational and personal and interpersonal culture to be more human and relationship-centered, needing to prioritize healing in our institutions' budgets and in our funding practices, incorporating relationship-centered practices in community to repair trust. We know that our institutions have a history of harm. Being able to reflect on that, acknowledge that, and work through that in order to build trust with the community is central. And the work that we do as Campus Compact is to help our institutions do that work more authentically. Again, this is the concept of equity that Nexus Community Partners has defined, and I really like the piece around self-determination. The other concept that we've been working on is return on equity, and we've heard this concept within the context of the world of finance, but not really in the world. We use equity in our work, right, especially in the social work that we're doing, but not in a way that connects these concepts. So I'm going to share a couple of notes from the field. This was an email that we received, my assistant director received about me. And this was from a faculty member at my previous institution. The 2017 event organized by Marisol Morales was a decisively negative event that focused more on Black Lives Matter than on the proper respect due to Dr. King. Now that's a whitewashing of the civil rights movement, right? And that's a lack of acknowledgement of what our students of color, Black students, were experiencing, particularly during this time, when there were more and more videos of unarmed Black men and women being killed at the hands of police. And our decision to make a space for them that was healing, for them to voice what they were experiencing in connection with the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, was important for us. And because it made someone uncomfortable, right, skewed their whitewashed version of Dr. King and the civil rights movement, she didn't want to participate. Fine with me. But these are also the microaggressions and aggressions and issues of oppression that we experience. The second one comes from when I attended the 2016 30th anniversary conference for Campus Compact in Boston. A community engagement director from Georgia said this to me: "It's easier to work with the immigrant Latino community than the African American community." And so this is a situation where they're pitting communities against each other, not understanding the vulnerability of the immigrant Latino community, particularly in a place like Georgia, and not understanding the historical harm that that university had created with the local African American community, which had led to issues around mistrust. This is not okay for us to say, it's not okay for us to do, and we need to do better. So I think you also remember the incident in Philadelphia where two African-American men had the police called on them at Starbucks. And the decision of Starbucks to close down for a day and do a racial bias training. And so this post came out around that time. On which day are we closing America for racial bias training? And the idea is that we have never, as a nation, recognized our history of harm and exploitation, that we have not done our own truth and reconciliation process, and we continue to see the effects of oppression and racism in our institutions and in our political life. So we know the case for diversity, equity, inclusion. Yeah, I need a couple more. Right, there's the moral, social justice, there's the economic, there's the market, there's the results, the input. We know that case. But how do we think about it differently? So as I was thinking about equity and this return on equity, I probably was buying a house or selling a house or trying to do something like that around the time. But sort of taking from the world of finance this idea of return on equity and flipping it, reclaiming it, right? So return on equity in the world of finance is about the net income returned as a percentage of shareholder equity. So it's the money you put in, does some stuff, waits a little while, and then what you get out in terms of money, right? So from a societal lens, how do we think about return on equity, or how can we? So return on equity is the amount of social, cultural, political, economic, and environmental return an institution, community, or society generates as a result of its efforts, commitment, and investment in eliminating barriers to full participation, especially for those historically and structurally marginalized from participation. So what does this mean? What are we putting in to eliminate those barriers to full participation? So the result of our input is not more money, right? It is actually the elimination of barriers so that we can actually get to a place where everyone, regardless of their identity, can participate fully as human beings in our society. And so to me, that's the work that we strive to do. That is the sort of goal that we have in doing this work. How are we doing this work? To create opportunities for full participation. So Strum came out with a definition of full participation as being an affirmative value focused on creating institutions that enable people, whatever their identity, background, institutional position, to thrive, realize their capabilities, engage meaningfully in institutional life, and contribute to the flourishing of others. So in the context of higher ed, full participation looks at student success, diversity, and civic engagement. And so connecting knowledge and resources to address complex social problems, creating pathways to social and economic citizenship through education, and building capacity and commitment to diverse leadership. So these are some initial steps that our institutions can do to help begin to address barriers and obstacles towards full participation. And this is concept we're still developing and thinking about the ways to give institutions opportunities to reflect on this and make deep commitments to eliminating these barriers for full participation. And that's it. Thank you.